Hi, so what you see right now are three black shapes. And you can see that some of those black shapes are more easily recognizable as a letter right now. So the S is black in the upper left-hand corner. The A on its side, we can recognize that as an A on its side, I think. And the one on the right, however, the black shapes are not the recognizable letter form. It's the white that might be considered a hole in that black area. And so in terms of figure and ground, we would say that the S is the strongest figure that we see at the moment because it is black. We know we have a preference for reading black on white as figure. It is right side up, and it is the most complete outline of that entire letter form. The A that's on its side might be considered the second strongest figure. And of course, what's weakening it is that it is on its side. And there's a kind of chunk out of what is right now the lower left-hand corner of that shape. But what's in its favor, of course, is that it's mostly there, and that it is relatively large, and it is kind of in the center of the overall screen. On the right-hand side, we actually have three black shapes there. And again, the black shapes aren't what we would read as the figure, but the white hole inside of it is perhaps what we would read as the figure, and we'd call it an R. So all three of the figures, whether they are in black or the white, they are nameable. So that's also in favor of all three in calling them strong figures. The one on the right is the most interesting visually in terms of its figure and ground relationship because we don't see the entire outline or contour of the R. It's implied. There's an implied line on part of the top, from the center of the top over to the left, and on the left-hand side vertically, it's not there at all, and so it's totally implied. And so that makes us that gives us the situation of figure becoming ground, or we could call the same thing ground becoming figure. And what that's describing is the white area, which is this big white across the entire screen, which is the same white that goes into the form of the R. It flows into it. You could think of it like liquid. It flows into it. That's a characteristic of ground becoming figure, of the way I described it. Now, if I start within the R itself, in the part that I can actually recognize, well, it looks like the leg of the R, I definitely see that as a leg of an R. And the top part of the bowl, that's definitely part of the R. So I would say that's the figure, but as I go out further to the left, then that is, we would call that situation now figure becoming ground. Again, it's the same situation. So implied line is the major part of this that makes that an active figure-ground relationship. Okay, so now if I animate this, and those three letter forms come together, we're now seeing a situation that that situation is now an example of four main things: similarity, proximity, shared contour, and implied line. We already talked about implied line and its effect on figure becoming ground or ground becoming figure. We have not talked about those other three things yet. So the first one that I want to mention is this idea of proximity or relative closeness. So because these three letter form shape or groups of black shapes came closer together, we now it starts to reveal some other things. So it seems like that chunk that's out of the top left-hand side of the A is part of another letter. And that the left-hand side of that capital R, which was totally missing, now seems to be a little bit more strongly indicated. So because they're closer together, it's activating that white space between the black, and activating it essentially is saying, oh, it's making it more figure-like. Activating equates to making it more figure-like, or making a stronger figure. Now, if we look at the size of those shapes, so they started out, one with the A was on its side, the S was much smaller. So in addition to being them being further apart, and then they're now closer together, they are also now a similar size. And so that also helps the readability of all of these shapes now as an entire word, not just 3 separate letters. So their proximity, the similarity or sameness of their size, but we can take similarity a little bit further as well. If we look at the spacing between these groups of black, we can see that an easy one is the space between the A and the R. That bottom gap between it is the same distance as the stroke of the vertical left-hand side of the R would be if it were actually there. So that helps to indicate what's going on. We're going to stop this.